This week on The Other Side, a controversial look at the domestic violence problem. We take a step back from the high emotion and ask rationally, is there actually a problem big enough to require more than $3 billion of your money to intervene? Bruce Lehrmann reveals he's considering appealing the civil ruling that on the balance of probabilities, it's more likely he did rape Brittany Higgins than that he didn't. We will explain simply and clearly for you what is going on with all of that. And we'll discuss what a human right actually is with a libertarian. You'll be surprised to learn it's probably not what you think. G'day Adelaide, g'day Broome, g'day Australia. This is episode 311 of The Other Side for the weekend commencing Friday, May 3, 2024. I'm Damien Curry, and this is the show that tries to cut above the noise and the emotion and get deeper into the facts of the matter. More data, less hype. A small government adult view of the world, not a government must fix everything for me like a good mummy and daddy, childish ABC view of the world. We detest identity politics and wokeism on this show, and we detest government trying to impose equality. Equality is never fair to those who work harder and who achieve more for other people. And we think Australia is seriously on the wrong track, and we hold a little tiny bit of hope still that we may be able to turn the ship around. Enjoy the show. Now, I know you're probably sick to death of the Brittany Higgins, Bruce Lehrmann thing, so I want to give you a fast update on what you need to know as simply and clearly as I can out of what happened this week. So this week, on Wednesday, we had the hearing on who should pay whose multi-million-dollar legal fees. Now, the legal fees amount to a whopping $10 million. All the players had to make their submissions to the judge, and he'll be making a decision soon on all of that. Now, amid that hearing, the big news came that Bruce Lehrmann is considering appealing that civil court finding that on the balance of probabilities, it was more likely he raped Brittany Higgins than that he didn't. The Australian newspaper broke the news this week that Lehrmann is seeking help from international and local donors to help him mount that appeal. So we will see how all of that plays out over time. But as one legal commentator called Law Girl put it on X this week, having gone back into the lion's den to get his hat, Lerman maybe has now decided to go back and kick the lion in the testicle. We will see. It is a ballsy move if he does, because there was no finding actually in the criminal case against him, so it is still technically possible, that the ACT's new Director of Public Prosecutions could charge him again and run another criminal trial. The double jeopardy thing doesn't apply if there wasn't a verdict in the first trial, although that does seem highly unlikely given the shambolic state of the ACT's criminal justice system at the moment. Anyway, back to the civil costs hearing that happened this week in the defamation case. Channel 10 copped a shellacking from the judge again. The federal court judge in the case, Michael Lee, said that Channel 10 got a little bit too celebratory after its little win in April, and he said that that is going to be weighing on his decision about how much of their own legal bills the network will be made to pay and how much Lerman will be required to foot the bill for. It also came out that Brittany Higgins' lawyer sent Channel 10's lawyers an email threatening that she would refuse to be a witness for the network if they offered any deal to pay any kind of damages to Bruce Lehrmann in pre-negotiations or pre-settlement discussions. So if Channel 10 offered Bruce any money to settle out of court, Brittany would have walked. Now that's important because when judges consider who should pay the costs in a civil case, they look at everything that was done before the trial to try and sort it out before it got to court. So the more you acted in good faith to try to work things out before it gets to court, then the better it is. In his big ruling last month, Justice Lee found that Channel 10 had acted unreasonably in how it treated Lehrmann in the handling of that project interview with Lisa Wilkinson. This week, Channel 10 tried to argue that Lehrmann should have to pay more of the costs because he knew that the whole case was doomed to fail and he shouldn't have brought it in the first place. Well, okay, I think he was trying to clear his name after his criminal trial was aborted. But anyway, Channel 10 revealed that it had offered Lehrmann a walkaway deal where it offered to drop the case. If he dropped the case, then they wouldn't pay him anything, but they would also not seek to get costs paid by him. So it was a walk-away deal. You drop this thing, Bruce, and we're not going to give you anything, but we won't be chasing you for costs. Lerman said no thanks to that in under 2 hours, which I think speaks to his genuineness in wanting to clear his name. The judge said that it seems like Channel 10 made the offer in those terms so as not to lose Higgins as a witness, right? There was no offer to Bruce of any payment of damages. But 10's lawyers actually rejected that proposition from the judge. The judge was also not happy about a speech that Channel 10's lawyer Justin Quill made outside court back in April after the verdict was handed down. Quill said in a 10-minute media doorstop that the result was a resounding win for Channel 10. And he did a lot of media appearances after that on networks, including his own.
It's really clear that Bruce Lehrmann is the big loser out of today's judgment. But it's also clear that no one else emerged unscathed. Brittany Higgins didn't. We mentioned the unreliable witness on certain aspects finding before. Channel 10 didn't. The project didn't. Everyone involved has lost something as a result of this. What do you think we should take from this whole experience?
Well, I hate to say it, but it is often true that the only win is when anyone goes to court are the lawyers, and that is often the case. Look, ultimately, though, I just don't think it's right to say that 10 isn't and the project isn't a big win. I know I'm appearing on the project, so it seems like I'm just saying it for this reason, but I'm not. 10 had a big win today. It is really, really difficult to prove the truth of these sort of allegations, and it is a significant win to have done so. And hopefully it's a warning to other plaintiffs who want to come to court and con the court. Look, there are rarely complete winners in legal cases, but 10's as big a winner tonight as you could hope for.
That was a good question from Waleed Ali there. I'm no fan of that show, as you know, but credit where credit's due. But the judge didn't like the answer from the lawyer, Mr. Quill. Now, I'm a bit of a free speech absolutist, so I defend anyone's right to an opinion and to express it, even though I strongly disagree with a lot of what Quill said there. But with a cost decision still pending, a little more reservation may have been in order, perhaps. Quill also disputed the finding of Justice Lee in relation to Lisa Wilkinson's ill-timed Logies speech. Do you remember that great moment in Australia's legal and journalistic history? The ill-timed, vomit-inducing feminist rant was so inappropriate, it famously caused a delay in the Lerman criminal trial. In April, when he handed down his ruling, Justice Lee had said that Channel 10's lawyer's instruction to Lisa Wilkinson that she could go ahead and deliver that speech was grossly improper and unjustifiable, and it could have imperiled Mr. Lehrmann's right to a fair trial. Yeah, no kidding. The trial had to be delayed to give people time to forget the speech. It was outrageous that lawyers could have given that advice. But Channel 10 were doubling down on that. Quill criticised that comment from the judge in his media appearances after last month's verdict, and on Wednesday the judge got his chance to strike back, saying the comments were misleading and that Quill has done a discourtesy by commenting without having first read the whole judgment. Meanwhile, a referee has been appointed to help Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson decide how much of Wilkinson's legal costs will be picked up by Channel 10. She broke away from the network and hired her own lawyers. It all ended on Wednesday with Justice Lee reserving judgment for a later date. So now you're all up to date on that, and we'll let you know what happens next. The biggest failure of so-called progressive government policies and thinking on crime and illegal immigration happened this week when one of the detainees who was freed into the community committed a vile home invasion attack. This image has not been taken down by the E-Safety Commissioner, so we can show it to you like big grown-up adults. It's not pretty, so I won't leave it up for long, but this is what crime looks like, folks. 73-year-old Ninette Simons, a Perth grandmother and a cancer patient. Her husband Philip was assaulted and tied up, then Ninette was bashed and robbed. One of the three alleged perpetrators in this delightful crime was Kuwaiti-born Majid Dorkoshan, a freed immigration detainee, a 43-year-old gutless coward shell of a man if he's guilty of the crime that he's charged with, that's for sure. Duakashan had previously breached his immigration detention release curfew and had been taken back into custody. Then he got bailed 2 days later. This attack happened, and a magistrate had warned him he was already on very thin ice. So what exactly is going on? Last year, the High Court of Australia ruled that we had to let immigration detainees go free because it was unlawful to keep them indefinitely. So 152 of the worst had to be let out. The ones the government had been keeping in detention because of concerns about criminal pasts, known murderers, rapists and pedophiles. Everybody, naturally, freaked out. Albo quickly moved for new laws to be passed in December to allow for preventative detention. But you can only get that preventative detention if you bother to apply for it. And guess how many applications our wonderful Minister for Home Affairs, Claire O'Neill, and Albo's Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, have made so far? 152, do you think? 100? 50? 10? 1? Nope, not one. Not a single one. If you're a classical liberal or libertarian, you view government as a necessary evil. We have to have it to keep us safe collectively from real threats like invading armies and criminals. That is the top job, top responsibility of government. But if you're on the political left, you see government as a parent. You want the country run by someone. You want it run by someone other than you, so you don't have to worry about personal responsibility or adulting. What we have in Australia appears to be the worst of both worlds. We've got government meddling in every aspect of our lives and freedoms that we'd preferred that they butt out of, and at the same time not doing the very things that they're actually supposed to do as a priority, like keeping criminals and foreign invaders off the streets. It's ridiculous. Not a single preventative detention application made to deal with any of those 152 immigration detainees, even though we know that there are murderers, rapists and pedophiles among them. Great job, Labor Ministers Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles. Great job, Albo, you king of leadership, you. You may also recall that last month the government said it'd have a report out which detailed the visa conditions, the curfews, the electronic monitoring and the Community Protection Board assessments of all of the released detainees. But have we seen any report yet? No, nada, nothing, zilch. And we've had 4 people already in court for breaching their curfew orders or not maintaining their monitoring devices. It is insane. Meanwhile, I can't even mention the name of a certain religious figure who was subjected to an attack in Sydney recently because YouTube algorithms will immediately throttle the distribution of my videos thanks to Albo's insufferable e-Karen e-safety agency. But you know the religious person I'm talking about, right? This man has made a video this week on his return to work announcing that he has sadly lost an eye from that attack and forgiving his attackers and calling for peace despite that. Amazing stuff. But I can't show you that without being throttled because of the $450,000 a year public servant who's drunk on power who heads up the E-Safety Commission. What I can show you is a little video and a song made by some very clever people as a tribute to her fine work.
Karen, she's from the USA, works for the Aussie government, they say. She likes to censor, control what we say, but Australians are free, we want to obey. She's got her rules, her regulations, thinks she can manipulate our nation, but we won't back down, no hesitation. Australians speak up, it's our foundation. Karen, you can try, but you won't succeed. We won't be silenced, we won't concede. We've got our voices and our belief. No amount of censorship can bring us to our knees.
Well, we have a range of graduated powers. There could be civil proceedings and we could take them to court or we could fine them. Of course, the quantum of the fine would depend on the gravity of the non-compliance to really minimize the amount of content the Australians can see.
She's got rules, her regulations, thinks she can manipulate our Australia, speak up, it's our foundation. You can and you can try, but you won't succeed. We won't be silenced, we won't concede.
Are you accepting it?
We've got our voices and our beliefs. No amount of censorship can bring us to our knees.
Well, we have a range of graduated powers.
There's an epidemic of men's violence, screams the ABC. Australia's domestic violence crisis is out of control, the fearmongers in the media tell us. All men must take responsibility for this terrible state of affairs, says the PM. And if you don't care about women, you're not an ally. If you're not feeling guilty, gents, you're a sexist, misogynist pig. And we had a so-called National Cabinet meeting on Wednesday focused on the issue. They're the meetings that Prime Ministers and Premiers have when they don't actually want to take leadership on an issue so they can share the blame around when things don't work out. Albo following in ScoMo's spineless footsteps there. So good for the nation. The tragedy of domestic violence is not a myth. It does exist, as it always has. The tragedy of intimate partner homicide is also not a myth. It exists, as it always has. I want to be really clear here. Domestic violence is a terrible thing, and it does impact women more than men because the biology of men is different to women. Men are more wired for physical violence, and when we use violence, we do greater damage. That's not an excuse in any way. That's just the reality. What this show is about today is the use of domestic violence as an issue for political and cultural control. So please keep that very important distinction in mind as you think about what we're putting forward here today. Part of being a good man is keeping your natural tendency to greater violence in check, being a white knight, not an aggressive, dumb thug. Boys who are fathered well or who are smart enough to overcome absent or bad fathering by themselves are taught to use their strength for good, to protect women and children, never against women and children, or other men, unless those men pose a real threat. It's a pity we still don't value a lot of these old masculine ideals culturally, but most men in Australia actually do. There are definitely some revolting creeps out there, but the idea that all men have a problem, or Australia has a problem with men generally, and the way we think and act generally is bad, that is nothing but a third or fourth wave radical feminist sexist misandry attack. Or in simple terms, good old-fashioned man-hatred playing out in our media and politics. And folks, it simply must stop. The fact is that the data simply doesn't support the narrative being pushed by the left-wing media and bureaucrats and activists that the problem of intimate partner homicide is getting worse, or that all men are somehow to blame, or that Australia has any kind of toxic male cultural problem. In fact, the data shows the exact opposite. Apart from all the hysteria and feminist marches this week, we also had the latest homicide data released by the Australian Institute of Criminology this week. And this is what it tells us. This is the rate of homicides in Australia per 100,000 people from 1989 on the left of the chart to 2023 on the right. Back in 1989, you had a 1.8 in 100,000 chance of being murdered in this country. Today, it's less than half that. Half. That's massive, and we should be celebrating it. Between the 1st of July 2022 and the 30th of June last year, there were 232 homicides, giving us a rate of 0.87 per 100,000. But what about domestic violence-related homicide? What about intimate partner homicide, the radical feminists will argue? Surely that's gone up. We all know that. I mean, well, actually, no. Homicides are classified into domestic, meaning an intimate partner, a relative, or someone living with you, acquaintance, meaning someone you know not living with you, and a stranger. This chart shows all three types, and the rates from 1989 to 2023 for each type. The dark green line is domestic. The light green line is acquaintance. They have both dropped massively since 1989. The rate of domestic homicide in 2022-23 was 0.3, and the acquaintance homicide rate decreased to 0.24, the lowest since 1989, when it was 2.5 times that. As you can see from the grey line at the bottom, the type of homicide that hasn't dropped is stranger homicide. And the victims of stranger homicide are significantly mostly men. But surely there's something going on. I mean, the ABC's been screaming about it all week. The Sydney Morning Herald, the Age, and Nine Media, and The Project. I mean, surely they all can't be misleading us, can they? They just had an emergency national cabinet meeting Zoom call. I mean, it must be real. It's probably the gender of the victims. That must be where women victims are on the rise. Oh, no, that's also falling. Most victims of homicide in Australia are still male. In 2023, male victims were 69% of homicides, 171 out of the 232 murders overall. That puts the male victim rate at 1.29 per 100,000, and the female rate is at 0.56, well less than half. And over time, it's just more really good news. Since 1989, the rate of male victimisation halved and the rate of female homicide victimisation decreased by more than half at 58%. So all this good news is just getting a bit too much. How will we demonise men in Australia now if they're the ones getting murdered more and the murder rates are all dropping? This is a big problem for the radical third or fourth wave feminists of sexism against men and general misandry. Whatever will these poor extremist activists do now? Well, maybe we can help them. Let's look at just the intimate partner murders, shall we? There were 38 intimate partner murders in Australia in the 2023-23 year. It's horrible, okay? But Australia has 27 million people. So the chance of being killed by your intimate partner in any given year is 1 in 710,000. How small is that? Well, the chance that you'll be struck by lightning in every given year is approximately the same. So it's kind of small. You can sleep safely and not worry, folks. Of these 38 horrible, I'm not saying they're not horrible, but 38 intimate partner murders in 2023, 4 of them were male victims and 34 were female victims. But the better news just keeps on coming. The female rate since 1989 has plummeted. And again, even the male rate is down. So this is simply not a major national crisis, as tragic and truly sad as the individual stories might be. We focus on the tragedy of individual stories because we're human and we're not psychopaths. We have empathy. Even one is too many, cry the radicals. Yes, that's true, especially if someone you know and love is sadly the one. But it's like the tens of thousands of cancer and heart disease deaths every year, or the 3,000 male suicides. It's the tragedy of life. And grown-ups realise that government can't necessarily fix it. Whether we react to life's horrors by throwing billions of dollars of our national wealth at a problem has got to be considered using our rational, not our emotional brains. And this narrative just isn't holding up for the feminists and interest groups who want that money and those resources, I'm afraid. But they know that they've got an emotional ace to play. And they can easily make any politician or journalist or news commentator who resists their narrative look totally mean-spirited and evil. Believe me, I'd rather ignore this story and get more viewers and be more liked. But we can't. I do this show for grown-ups to cut through the emotion and try to work out what's right. When the data, that means reality, doesn't fit the narrative that they want to push, the feminists never say, oh, okay, you're right, my bad, sorry. They just double down on the emotion. They get into the abuse hurling and shout twice as loud to drown out the facts and reality. And if a man like me dares to present data like this, they will shout me down and call me all sorts of vile names. Well, I'm sorry, but the data just doesn't back up the hysteria. It doesn't support your marching in the street. It just doesn't. It's a real Ben Shapiro, the facts don't care about your feelings issue. The Australian government already has a 10-year, $2.3 billion gendered violence action plan. That was already highly questionable as a use of public money and resources. Now they're throwing another $900 million plus after their little national cabinet meeting on Wednesday. So it's $3.2 billion now? That's a lot of money. Way too much, in my view, when we have so many other urgent issues and are in so much national debt already for a problem that seems to be decreasing, not increasing. But of course, we're not allowed to say that as men. But hang on. Maybe we are improving, but we're really bad by world standards. It's Australian men that are the problem, that all that toxic masculinity in our macho Aussie culture, right? No, wrong again. Sorry. This is a map of all countries by murder rates. The dark green ones are the countries with the far lower rates. And look, toxic masculinity Australia is, it's dark green. We're in the less than 1 in 100,000 category with China, where you've got more chance of being killed by the government than anyone else, and Spain, Portugal and Italy, those Latino countries where men are well known to be very shy and retiring when it comes to expressing their sexuality. Not. Nope, this narrative is an absolute dog, feminists, but they will keep pushing it and our media and pollies will keep lapping it up. Why? Because you can't stand up against it without looking like crap. So they're all too gutless to stand up and be the first ones to speak the truth. But somebody has got to have the courage to do that, or it's just going to get worse and worse. Do you? So as our last segment just showed, the new data clearly demonstrates a steady and huge drop in all homicides, including intimate partner homicides against women in Australia since 1989. In 2023, male victims were 69% of homicides, but the overall number was half the 1989 number. And the female rate is a huge 58% down on what it was in 1989 too. So much good news that we can hardly stand it. A bad 4 months out of 34 years, as tragic as it is, must not be used to drive hasty, panicked political decision-making. Our lack of ability in Australia to stay rational amid the emotion and do proper statistical analysis is getting ridiculous and dangerous. Sometimes the right thing to do is not to act, not to spend, and not to have government intervention. And guess what kind of government intervention they want to solve this problem, and the problem might not even exist. Yep, you guessed it, online censorship. What a surprise. Apparently this non-existent increase in violence against women is caused by that catch-all bogeyman of the 21st century, social media. Just shut down people arguing and communicating and discussing issues and all our problems will magically go away. No, they won't. They'll just get swept under the carpet and the bureaucratic elites will have control again over what you can and can't know and discuss and what the mainstream media will be told to report. Albo really copped it at the women's rally last weekend. It was kind of fun watching a man who's built his political power in part on the false narrative of demonising men every single chance he can possibly get, finally copping it from the same extreme feminist mob that went after ScoMo and Tony Abbott. Here's how ABC News saw that.
As women around the country gathered to march at the weekend, they were joined by the Prime Minister, who walked with the crowd and listened. When the rally called for the federal government to do more, he wanted to respond. Rally organiser Sarah Williams let the crowd decide whether he should speak. And with microphone in hand, the Prime Minister expressed his frustration.
To be clear, we did ask to speak, myself and Katie, and were told that that wasn't possible, and that's fine. I respect the organisers' right to do that.
That's a full-out lie.
To do that.
The organiser accusing Albo of lying there is Sarah Williams. She said she'd asked the Prime Minister previously to speak at the rally, but was told that he was too busy. On Monday, the Today Show got the Prime Minister on to talk about what happened and to respond to the allegation of lying from Ms Williams. But have a listen to what Ms Williams wrote on social media after the event, according to the Today Show.
Sarah Williams wrote on social media after the event that the Prime Minister showed entitlement and abused his power to diminish a vulnerable young woman.
I'm sorry, what? Can we just play that again?
Sarah Williams wrote on social media after the event that the Prime Minister showed entitlement and abused his power to diminish a vulnerable young woman.
She says he abused his power to diminish a vulnerable young woman. I'm not in the habit of defending Elbow, but guys, we've just got to stop letting stuff like this go through to the keeper. We've got to stop and call it out. There's too many casual put-downs of men that just go by without anyone challenging them. Carl wouldn't dare. It's too scary on morning TV, and I frankly don't blame him. Although Lisa Wilkinson's not beside him anymore, so it's a bit less dangerous up there than it used to be, I guess. But anyway, let's just correct this utter nonsense about Elbow diminishing a vulnerable young woman. The Prime Minister was very deferential. He asked to speak before doing so. He wasn't acting entitled. Although Sarah Williams might be shocked to realise that he is the Prime Minister of our country, so he actually has every right to feel a teensy-weensy bit of entitlement to speak at a rally, since he kind of has earned the right to because he was voted in by the people. Do we have no respect at all anymore for our institutions? Anyway, I am not going to defend Elbow anymore. He's brought all of this on himself. Here's how he tried to wiggle his way out of it all on Channel 9.
Prime Minister, good morning. So what did happen?
Good morning. Good to be with you. Well, what was important yesterday was that the organisers throughout the country deserve credit for organising these rallies. I was happy not to speak. I was happy to speak.
You were called a liar. How does that sit with you?
I'm focused on the issue, Carl. It was an emotional day for people, and I get that. What is an emotional issue? Because women were saying yesterday, enough is enough.
And we've got heaps more platitudes like that from Elbow throughout the week, but I'm not sure what else a Prime Minister in the current climate in Australia could actually say here. It'd be hard to go on national television and try to show all the data that we just showed in our last segment, that homicide rates of all kinds are going down, and then argue that there actually is no problem, when the mass hysteria is insisting that there is some kind of crisis. Imagine Elbow standing there trying to say, look, I'm sorry, but everyone's got it wrong. There's actually no problem. He'd be howled out of government, but he'd actually be right. Anyway, it couldn't happen to a more deserving bloke, in my opinion.
So we need to look across the board at all of the policies and what we can do to make a positive difference.
I think PM people are obviously very grateful, for the record funding that you're pouring into this space, right? But yesterday what we saw was emotion, as you mentioned, but also frustration that we've had 27 women allegedly killed here at the hands of men. It's just not good enough. And we saw those scenes repeated right across the country. I mean, you've called an emergency national cabinet, but the concern is, you might be pessimistic, but it's just going to be another talk fest.
Well, I agree, Sarah, that we need to do more. And that's what women were calling for yesterday. And that's what their allies were calling for as well.
Oh, yes, the allies. Those good men, those better men than you and I. The ones who also believe and support the false narrative that all men are inherently bad and masculinity is inherently toxic. Those good men. So the Prime Minister has no choice, guys, if he wants to keep his job. He has to nod along and keep saying, we need to do more to fix this problem, rather than telling the truth and actually saying, compared to 1989 and every single year since, things are not so bad. The tragedy here is that we're missing the point. The real problem. One of the latest murders of a woman involved a criminal who should never have been out on bail. So what's actually to blame isn't some vague kind of badness in men in Australia that all men must work to eliminate because we're so toxic, but badness in our criminal justice system. A criminal justice system based on the ideology of, guess who? The left. The very same people at those rallies who want criminals to be seen as victims and treated with kid gloves. That's the real issue here. And the hypocrisy is really sickening. They're really good at this stuff, the left. So much better at beating up a problem and using it to get their political and financial way. One day we'll all wake up to it, but I fear it won't be anytime soon. When it comes to analysing the actual real data on homicides and what's happening in reality, There's one story that those on the political left who base everything on the identity politics of gender and race and sexuality never want to discuss. Blaming men for all things bad in the world is very handy and quite socially acceptable these days. You'll get applauded if you criticise old white guys. But as we've shown, the data just doesn't stack up for the current wave of man-hatred in Australia. But I'm afraid that reality is even worse for those to whom everything that isn't male or white or old or Christian or straight is holy. Tragically, and this is not something that I'm celebrating in any way, folks, it is tragic, there were 49 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander victims of homicide in 2022-23, according to the Institute of Criminology report. That makes up 20% of all the murder victims in the country. That's a much bigger percentage than the 4% of the population that ATSI people actually represent. In 2022-23, the homicide victimisation rate for Indigenous Australians was 5.36 per 100,000, which puts it in the same category as the US generally and Russia and PNG. Again, it's much worse for men. 2.5 times more men than women are killed. We have data on 45 of those 49 Indigenous murders from that year. Of those 45, 27 of them were men killing other men, 5 were women killing other women, and 5 were women killing men, and 8 were men killing women. Also, more than 3/4 of the murders were committed by Indigenous perpetrators. Now, all of this is a good example of how in Australia we generally only hear one side of a story. We hear the so-called progressive side. Turn on the ABC and mainstream media and you'll hear all the woes of the world laid out on any given day. And the solution never seems to lie with people taking personal responsibility. The solution also never seems to lie with conservative values, valuing the nuclear family unit, children growing up in a strong family home, people behaving modestly, people working hard, respect for men, behaving politely, controlling emotion, courage, stoicism, and heaven forbid, any traditional religion. The solution always seems to lie with more government intervention and policies that enhance the victim's status of those affected, that support the great Marxist worldview of endless victims and endless oppressors. If somebody's had a bad life, there's nothing they can do about it. It's never their fault. There's some oppressor that we should be blaming. Some bad person, usually a white, straight, financially secure male, is to blame. And the victim is suffering because of their race, gender, sexuality, or poverty, and, quote, the government ought to do something about it, unquote. Sorry, guys, but it is really getting tired. I've only been back in Australia 4 years, and I'm astounded at the sexism in this country against men. It is vile, entrenched, and disturbing. We can't see it because we're in it, but you ask any foreigner what their perspective is on Australia, and they'll tell you it's a man-hating nation. I'm even more amazed by how gutless so many men are about speaking back and fighting it. The demonisation of men and the double demonisation of anyone who challenges that narrative is sickening. We are in a very, very bad place on gender issues. Criminals kill people. 99.999% of men are not criminals. But you would never know it listening to the so-called feminists in this country. We also have a lot of very poorly educated people for a very rich and blessed country. People who don't understand basic statistics and math or how to properly make deductions from statistics about causality, especially our journalists and media. Well, something caught my eye on X recently that I thought was very clever. Kenelm Tonkin, the president of the Christian Libertarian Institute, tweeted a poll asking people which of the following is a human right: housing, medical care, food, or none of the above. So housing, medical care, food, or none of the above. Interesting food for thought. Before we show you the results, I've invited Kenelm Tonkin onto the show to tell us why he decided to run this poll and what it all means. Kenelm, thanks very much for joining us. Good to have you here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about why you decided to ask that question. It's a bit of a provocative question in and of itself, isn't it?
Well, you know, there's a lot of commentary going on social media at the moment, and a whole range of issues, as you know. And it just seemed to me there was cloudy thinking around what rights are. A lot of people talk about rights, but I thought to myself, why don't we just test this by asking that question and just see, you know, what people know and what they don't.
So classical libertarian theory, Kenelm, how do you define a right, and do these things fall into the category of rights?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an ancient discussion. This is nothing new. You know, if you think of a right as something that's inherent in terms of being human, you know, it's part of being human, what it is to be human. And we're owed certain rights, you know, in the dignity of being human. And this is, or God-given rights, if you like. And this is quite different from entitlements that are given by humans, by people, by government. You know, I think John Locke, who is the philosophical father of classical liberalism, he put it best when he said, rights come from God, not from government.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
so anything that has a financial resources aspect to it, you know, this really falls into the realm of, you know, social programs, not inherent human rights. I've got a quote actually from George Bush Sr., who puts a finer edge on it. You know, he said, there's a difference between rights and entitlements. You have a right to liberty, but you're not entitled to financial resources of other people.
Right.
And,
okay.
You know, so I'm looking on X, for instance, and I'm seeing all sorts of commentary as to what rights are, and it's really foggy thinking, Damien.
Okay, but when we think about rights, we think about housing, medical care and food. Obviously, in a nice culture and a nice society, it would be nice to think that we could provide all of that for everybody. And that's usually where socialism starts. It starts with these sorts of basic things that we all would kind of agree should be relatively available. And then it sort of grows from there, unfortunately. But just explain to us why it's important to understand that even housing, even medical care, even food are not technically rights.
Yeah, because they require financial resources. So those financial resources come from other people. No one has a right to your financial resources. It's nice if you can get it, according to socialists, but it's a slippery slope. You know, what is one person's food today can become, you know, luxury mansions, you know, by a dictator in another country. We don't want that. We want sharp thinking that goes to our inherent rights that don't cost money, but they are owed to us by the dignity of being human. They're God endowed, if I can put it that way, in the John Locke manner.
Let's have a look at how the results went on the...
Lots of foggy thinking, and of course the way the poll is designed is really to test that.
Yeah, so let's have a look at the results. Now, we've got housing came in at 5.9%, medical care at 7.4%, food at 18.3%, and none of the above at a whopping 68.4% out of about 1,200 votes. Now, obviously, your audience on Twitter X is libertarian-leaning, Kenelm, so that result, even though it does represent a big sample, isn't exactly random, but with a leftist audience, you know, we might see the none of the above nearly zero. But you know, it does indicate, I guess, that there is a bit of an understanding out there emerging a little bit, right? That there is a difference between this idea of what is a right and what is an entitlement.
It's true. I do have a strong classical liberal libertarian following. This is true. And that's why I sent this poll out to Ozpoll and Ozpoll 2024. And, you know, in the commentary that came from it, which amounted to hundreds of ancillary conversations, a lot of the people who had cloudy thinking actually, you know, were centre-right. And I just think it's important that we on the centre-right are very clear on Western freedoms and Western rights. I'm sort of gratified that sort of 68% understood this clearly, but the way the poll was structured, there was a trick in there, wasn't there, to determine whether they knew that. And so we need to just reinforce this point, what rights are.
It's a hard one to sell, though, isn't it? Because people do err on this idea of, being kind and being generous and sharing things around. But all we're saying here, or all you're saying, is that it's an understanding of the difference, understanding the difference between what you're entitled to as a God-given right and what entitlements you have been bestowed by your community, if you like, if not the government. Your community has agreed to help and assist you to housing, to food, and to medical care, and that we should never take that for granted.
Yeah, it's not an entitlement, because you are taking the funding for social programs is taken from other people. What right do you have to take money from other people? And if we maintain a sharp classical liberal approach and we're clear where we stand, then we don't get this slippery slope of, like NDIS. The budget for this on compassionate grounds is enormous. It's more than Medicare. It's more than defence combined. We can't survive as a civilization, as a country, if we keep doing this. We have to get back to our basic classical liberal principles. Look, these are all enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's not as if this is unknown, and we can just keep talking about them. The right of assembly, habeas corpus, right to association, freedom to move, freedom not to be harmed or tortured, on and on. And COVID brought out all the abuses of our human rights. And guess what? They're doing it again with the E-Safety Commission.
Yeah. So we're seeing that the actual human rights are being taken away. In the meantime, we've got other things being defined as human rights that actually are not, but are obviously nice to haves for a civil society. Kenelm, interestingly, you did this in America just to show the difference between the mindsets. So we had a colleague do it in America as well, and it was 92% that said none of the above. So a much higher figure, which I suppose illustrates that deeper understanding in the United States of liberty.
They're 100% clear. And as these polls, as there was cross-pollination in commentary between those who responded with the US poll and the Australian poll, what I discovered is that Americans who responded to the US poll were teaching Australians what rights are. I mean, it's extraordinary. When you think about how far Australia has drifted in this regard, one of the key authors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was H.V. Evatt, the Labor man in the Menzies period. And yet now even people on the centre-right who are sort of drifting don't know the differences. So we need to educate. We need to get back to an education system which relays these values.
Yeah, we are a long way from a good classical education system, that's for sure. You had a history with the Liberal Party as well yourself at fairly senior levels in the day, I understand, and you have seen that party shift a little bit. Does that concern you as well?
I joined the Liberal Party. There was a letter published by Russell Broadbent recently, a long-time Liberal MP. He became an MP in 1993, first up. And it was an internal letter to Peter Dutton imploring him not to go down this E-Safety Commission path and the digital ID path. Implored Peter Dutton not to do it. And in standing up for those old-fashioned classical liberal values, 5 months later he lost his pre-selection. I joined at a time Russell Broadbent first came into the party, and these classical liberal values were the very essence and DNA of the Liberal Party. And I left the Liberal Party and joined the Libertarians because the Liberal Party no longer stands for those values. And the Libertarians clearly do. They clearly understand what Australia has lost with the Liberal Party.
Yeah. All right. Kenelm, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Just one thing,
Yes,
Damien,
go
just
ahead.
before you go.
Absolutely.
In the time it's taken us to have this interview, Australian government debt has increased $228,000.
Wow.
Let that one sink into your readers. All right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we are out of control on the debt. There's no question about that. It's getting more and more frightening as the days go by. Kenelm Tonkin, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And that is all we have time for this week on The Other Side. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, X and YouTube at Other Side Oz. That's at Other Side AUS. They are our two main social media platforms. We are no longer on Meta's Facebook or Instagram. So please follow us on YouTube and on X. We really do need your support, and the best way to give us that support is to help by hitting those subscribe buttons, by amplifying our content, by sharing it, and of course by commenting. That's a really important thing to do as well. So please do that. All of it helps with the magical algorithms that control us all out there. But we are off Meta, no more Instagram, no more Facebook. We just simply cannot trust Meta to support conservative content at all. So we're completely ditching those platforms altogether. We'll catch you next weekend on The Other Side. We drop a new show every Friday night. I'm Damien Curry. Bye for now.